engineers do want to very efficiently get to a solution, which I totally understand and respect. There's not a lot of time for back and forth and wishy-washy. They want to have black and white as quickly as possible. I respect that. Whereas architects, building architects, they like to just keep designing and designing. So I work as this liaison between the right brain, left brain, construction and technological stuff versus the more creative and more artistic stuff, and I'm able to bring that together. So this thing called design, what happens is we all get together to do that design, and then you engineer that design, and then you landscape that design, and then you build that design. But if you skip over the design and you just go to the first thought in your head and just put it on paper, you're really missing out on a lot of opportunity to perhaps come up with a better opportunity or a better solution.
Hey there, welcome to the Stormwater World podcast. Shout out to our parent company, Digital Stormwater. We're out there making an impact in stormwater one click at a time. We put more stormwater people in front of your stormwater products and services. How we get there is totally up to you. Some of the services that we offer are social media management, Google, LinkedIn, and Meta ads, SEO and content creation, website builds and updates, AI automations, consulting, and a lot more. So the question is, who do you know that needs our help? If you're on YouTube, you can click on that QR code to learn more, or you can give us a call at 844-451-2534, or you can visit us at digitalstormwater.com and schedule a call with us today. I'd like to thank everybody that's been listening to this podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you. Let's get back to the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of the Stormwater World podcast. Today, we are going to talk about rainfall integration. So what is rainfall integration? We'll get to that. And I'm happy to have Tom Mortensen with raSmith here with me today. Welcome, Tom.
Hey, Ty.
And before we get started, let me tell you a little bit about Tom. Tom Mortensen has over 35 years of experience in site design, landscape architecture, and related design and construction in the construction professions. He has worked on design projects with the U.S. Forest Service, National Park Service, Boy Scouts of America, Native American Tribes, and the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. Since 2011, he has been teaching a class at the UWM School of Continuing Education and Water Technology Certification Program on the topics of green infrastructure, water, native landscape, and site design methods for more resilient integration of rainfall on sites. So
I got to shorten that.
Hey, no, it's great. I love doing that. Yeah, if people need to know, they need to know who they're listening to. Rainfall integration, which is also known as what?
Stormwater management.
Hey, we got you guys. Everybody's like, oh, what?
It's a different mindset. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's going to be a lot of what we talk about today as you share with us your perspective on stormwater management. So where would you like to start?
Just back in 2011 when I started teaching the class, it was early on and there wasn't a whole lot of stuff happening with GI at the time. It was in its infancy, but over the years I've been able to build the curriculum and also take a lot of photographs and project examples and case studies and build upon them on lessons learned, things that do work, some things that don't work. I cite a lot of examples of early GI projects that maybe clogged up or weren't too successful, or the landscape selections weren't necessarily thought through very well, and sometimes things work, sometimes they don't, and that's why I entitle it Nature Ignores Design That Ignores Nature. And that's kind of a tagline I came up with a long time ago, and it does catch a lot of attention because I think when we're designing systems like this and thinking about them, we really have to take our cues from nature. When we try to defy it, it always wins. We always lose. And I just think there's some really simple principles that can be implemented on projects just by taking your cues from nature.
That's the whole point, right? Pre-development is what we're supposed to be going for, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like just by how we're supposed to be approaching the whole idea. So why wouldn't I've struggled 13 years. I feel like a baby in the industry and everything, but some of it you go back to common sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what we can do to not disturb while we're trying to put it back to where it should have been, so that we can let Mother Nature do its thing. It all kind of hand in hand.
And sometimes less is more. Simple and bold can be very effective. That is a thing that I also talk about when you look at the native landscape in Wisconsin. It's very simple and bold. It's not complicated and vague. It's not busy. And so again, using that as a cue when we're designing a site, when we're grading a site, when we're coming up with the landscape plans and how we're going to integrate it. A lot of great examples of using native landscape, but it is a process, and you have to have a client that's completely on board with it. Because if they're not, you might as well be planting $20 bills. If they're not going to know how to maintain it, or if they're not going to commit to what it takes to get it established, it's not cheap. It doesn't mean that it has to be expensive, but it is an investment of time and a commitment to get these systems all working properly.
Yeah, and I apologize. I should have let everybody know that. So, your title and who you are by credentials, if you will. So you are a site planner and landscape architect and senior project manager with raSmith. And then I am unfamiliar with your credentials. So PLA, I'm sure our audience will know, but again, I make a habit of being ignorant on this podcast, so I'll let you educate me. So
All
PLA
right.
and ASLA. So what is a PLA and ASLA, if you don't
So
mind?
PLA is just PLS for land survey, professional landscape architect. We are licensed. And so I do stamp drawings, and we do go to conferences, and we're a licensed profession. And then ASLA is American Society of Landscape Architects. It's a national organization, similar to AIA is for architects, or ASCE. So ASLA is an organization that I'm very involved in, our state chapter. I do a lot of public speaking and presentations at the conference every year. I also help put together content, and I'm hosting a field session in June for the statewide members that are going to be coming to Milwaukee for a field day. But yeah, that's ASLA, PLA, Professional Landscape Architect.
Thanks. I could have guessed, but I didn't want to guess. I'd probably be wrong. So thanks, and I apologize for not mentioning that when I was going through your lengthy bio, which is actually not that lengthy, right? There's been
I
much
could make
longer
it
than that.
longer, but
Well, awesome. And you're located in Wisconsin for anybody that's kind of like I think no matter what, I know you speak across the country, but I think it always matters, like geographically where you're located, because that's probably the stuff that you see the most. Unless, I don't know, are you working on national projects, or do you mostly see stuff in Wisconsin, correct?
in the upper Midwest, yeah, we have a Naperville,
Okay.
Illinois office. We also do have an office out in California, but from a landscape perspective, we don't really work on projects out there because it's a completely different regime, completely different climate, and our clients are served better when they're working with someone local who knows that. But we used to do a lot of national work, a lot of regional malls and things like that. So I've been able to work in Reno, Nevada, and Virginia, and all over the place. Not so much anymore, though. I think from a private site development standpoint, we've gotten a little bit more focused on the upper Midwest region. A lot of the design principles are similar in the upper Great Lakes area. A lot of the soils are similar, although I would say here, even in Milwaukee, where I'm based, you go 20 miles west of here, and it's all sand and gravel and glacial till. It's very alluvial. And then here by the lake, it's very heavy clay. When we're talking about infiltration of stormwater, we have to really understand what substrate or what subsoils we're really dealing with, and they vary quite a bit just in this southeastern Wisconsin. So applying a typical technical standard to the entire region doesn't always work, because you have to take a completely different approach and mindset when you're working in glacial till versus heavy blue clay. So it keeps us on our toes.
So do you feel like you look at it different because you do have as a landscape architect? Is there, how am I going to say this? I'm not a very politically correct person. Is there is there issues between the way things and the way engineering, like the engineering side see things versus, or is it, how's that relationship?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked.
As I try to stir the pot.
No, I'm really glad
Not
you.
really. But I feel like there's a difference, right? Like my wife's a civil engineer. And, I mean, she's never said anything bad about any kind of architecture or anything ever. And what's bad is like she does the show notes, Tom. So she's gonna hear. She's definitely hearing that.
Well, I get
Anyway,
asked that question quite a bit. And
oh, really? Okay, cool.
yeah, I was on a podcast last July, and it wasn't specific to stormwater. It was just in general about water and water quality and the Clean Water Act and ground, a lot of different topics. But that same question was asked: how does that work? And I always say it's land, landscape architect, not plantscape architect. So a lot of people think
Okay.
landscape architects, they sell trees. No, we don't. We do a lot more than that. We have to know about grading. We have to know about soils. We have to know about constructability. We have to know about plants as well. But that's not the entire or the complete process of what we do. We get involved in a lot of different things. And so I've been at raSmith 20 years. Just last week it was 20-year anniversary,
Oh,
and yeah, it's been great. Best move I ever made because when I first got here, I was the only landscape architect. And
oh wow.
I was a little bit freaked out. I was surrounded by 200 some civil engineers, and again, they weren't really fully understanding what a landscape architect does, and that's why I say landscape. So really, that's why I call myself a site planner, because there's this thing called
Mhm.
design, and when we're working on a project, there's this thing called design, and it's a multidisciplinary approach to coming up with a solution on a project. And I always say there's 10 ways we could do this, and they would all be right. This isn't a one and done thing. And I think engineers do want to very efficiently get to a solution, which I totally understand and respect. There's not a lot of time for back and forth and wishy-washy. They want to have black and white as quickly as possible. I respect that. Whereas architects, building architects, they like to just keep designing and designing. So I work as this liaison between the right brain, left brain, construction and technological stuff versus the more creative and more artistic stuff, and I'm able to bring that together. So this thing called design, what happens is we all get together to do that design, and then you engineer that design, and then you landscape that design, and then you build that design. But if you
Okay.
skip over the design and you just go to the first thought in your head and just put it on paper, you're really missing out on a lot of opportunity to perhaps come up with a better opportunity or a better solution for the site plan. So there is that process that as a landscape architect we need to integrate with the civil engineers and a whole group of other people too, the architect, structural engineer, traffic engineer, that kind of collaboration. If it happens up front very early on in a project, you can save so much time down the road because now everyone has the right mindset. We're all on the same page on how we're going to approach this. And of course, we have municipal codes and things that we all have to deal with, and that's been the bane of my existence are these outdated, really just horrible landscape codes. To me,
Oh
that
wow.
isn't design. That's a mathematical conundrum, and all you're going to do is meet the math. And to me, it's just not creative. It doesn't really allow for using green infrastructure because, again, a lot of these codes are outdated, so there's no incentive to use GI. But I think that's changing now. I think there are a lot of clients and a lot of municipalities and a lot of agencies that they understand the benefit of implementing GI on their projects and why there's an incentive to do it. And so I'm seeing more and more on projects, whether they're private, public, municipal, where it's just becoming more of a known thing and less of a mystery as it used
So
to
you're
be.
not having to combat it as much as it's just becoming more accepted, or how do you combat some of that stagnant?
It's becoming more understood and accepted, and we can cite examples, so people are seeing more and more
Okay.
projects where it's been implemented. There's also incentives through MMSD, Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, there's grant funding available to implement GI. And so if you're going to add 5,000 square feet of impervious on a site, you have to implement some form of GI, whether that's permeable pavers, which we use a lot, bioswales, infiltration basins, other GI elements in order to get that grant funding. And it's you have to pay for it, you have to build it first, and then you get the reimbursement on the construction. So it's based on gallons captured, which I think is a really effective way to get people's head around it. It used to be a lot more technical and a lot more calculations. Now it's really just about gallons captured. And for an example, we did a project on the western side of Milwaukee County where there wasn't a whole lot of GI implemented in that region of the city. And we were working on a college campus, and they were going to build some housing for the student body. And we got $1.3 million of funding to implement GI on that project. It was the largest grant award ever given by MMSD so far. And the reason that they funded that is because, again, in that region of the city, there wasn't a lot of stormwater GI systems, and so they wanted to use it as just a poster child of what can be done. So there were bioswales, there was an infiltration basin, permeable pavers. We implemented probably 4 or 5 different strategies, and then we were able to say this is how many gallons we're capturing. Whether we're detaining it and just holding it back and releasing it later into the storm sewer, or actually infiltrating it into the ground, which requires a lot of real estate to do that. And this being a college campus, we did have a lot of green space to work with. So it was really a great success story. And we have other projects that we've done for schools and other things where we've been able to get that grant funding. So to answer your original question, there really is an incentive for developers and for entities to implement GI now through that program. And all it's really doing is holding back, injecting our free resource that falls from the sky, jamming it, putting it in a pipe as fast as possible, and getting it into the storm sewer, and then overburdening the combined sewer that we have here in Milwaukee. So it's really been an effective tool.
So the grant funding, are you guys assisting with that process, or who's doing the grant writing for that? I'm sure there's probably people interested in trying to obtain funding always.
Yeah, as grant funding can be more of an art than a science.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done both, where we've led the charge on the process, but ultimately the owner, the end user, the owner, has to be the one to file for or apply for the grant funding. But we can provide them with all the information. We can provide them with the amount captured, the process. We provide narratives that they can use in the grant, but ultimately the owner is the one who's applying for it.
Do you guys have a case study on that project you were just mentioning? Do you have that as a...
Don't have a case study on that one, but we did a big project down in the village of Greendale, which is a suburb of Milwaukee, in the medians along Grange Avenue that treats 51, I believe it treats 51 acres, and it removes over 700 pounds of TSS annually. And these are bioswales in a very large median down Grange Avenue. And I use that as a project study in the class that I teach or the presentations that I give because it's so robust. And it was a big project. And it was originally installed many years ago, and then what happened is because it was a native landscape, not a lot of people understand what it takes to manage a native landscape, especially high school students that they hire over the summer to cut grass and take care of these things. What happened in that project, it turned out really good when it was originally installed, and we didn't do the original planting design, it was done by another firm, but it got away from them. And the Canadian thistle and Queen Anne's lace moved in, and once that stuff goes to seed, it's the kiss of death. These are weeds that will never go, yeah, never go away, and it's just started taking over.
Like the Virginia creeper that I'm fighting.
Yeah.
Is it worse than Virginia creeper? Because I don't think there's anything worse. But then I have a personal issue with Virginia creepers.
But that's a native. Virginia creeper is native.
Does that make it good? Because I don't. Me and my wife hates it. I hate it. So
how many machetes do you own? You got to keep that stuff at bay. It goes everywhere. I guess it does have a benefit to wildlife, and it has a nice fall color. But it is really it's a monster plant.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
It might have been in there. But no, this is like Canadian thistle and Queen Anne's lace, which Queen Anne's lace is not native, but it's escaped into the wild. So it just got inundated with all of this stuff, and they're like, "What do we do?" And my answer was like, "We'll get a bale of hay and a book of matches, and just burn it and start over." Wow. Yeah, and they were like, "We're not, going to do that." So what they did is they started mowing it like turf. So they just took all these plants that were already established but completely inundated with weeds, and they just started mowing it just like grass. And because they did get grant funding for this, they had to keep the native and the original design intent intact. So I met with them, this is probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I said, "I think we can simplify this for you. We can make the maintenance of this huge bioswale a lot simpler for your staff to take care of by again, and I'll go back to it, keeping it simple and bold." So instead of 85 different plant species all smattered and thrown around like a box of crayons, what we did is we grouped everything together, still using native plants, but in much larger groupings. So at 35 miles an hour looking out of a car window, it has a lot more visual impact than a really busy landscape. We had 350 of these and 280 of these, and we just kept it really simple and bold. And now, when a high school or college student that works the summer on the grounds crew for the village, when they walk into a big patch of Monarda or purple coneflower or whatever, they're going to notice a different rogue kind of plant that doesn't look like all the other plants. So now they go, that's a weed. That doesn't belong here. And so we've taken their maintenance of these bioswales and we've really reduced it just by keeping it simple and bold instead of complicated and vague. And that's just a really cool example of a project that was implemented, and again, intention, but it just got out of hand, and how you can simplify things and bring it back and get it to work for the benefit that it originally was intended for.
No, I think that's great. I think where you have challenges is where you get the most. That's where you get to figure stuff out. You learn from it, and everything goes smooth. It's okay. You want that, but it's when you're able. That's when the rubber hits the road. When you really get to earn your keep. When it's going wrong, it's going sideways, and they're like, "Tom, fix this. How can we fix this without burning it to the ground?" But do you have, so that the presentation you're talking about, we may have some visual learners or whatnot. Would you be able to share that with us, and we could link it in the show notes potentially? Or so
Absolutely. Yeah. I just gave it I just gave it at another place last week, and I was invited to speak at another place. So I'm willing to share. I'm totally willing to share it. Yep.
Yeah, because I know it's hard. Like, we're having this conversation, and I'm a kind of visual guy, and yeah, I'm sure that you've got some good visuals in that presentation that
I do. There's not a lot of words. There's nothing worse than a PowerPoint.
That's the kind of books I like.
Yeah. Big words, but a lot of pictures, a lot of images. And I do that on purpose because I've been the victim of having to sit through a PowerPoint with bullet points and someone just reciting them. And I just want to put a bullet in my head. I'm picking gum off my shoe after 5 minutes. Or in this presentation, it's very visual. So I'll throw up an example and I'll just tell a story. If it is something that someone can page through, though, and get some benefit from, I think I might even have it recorded somewhere. So it might be something that I could share. I spoke at a Stormwater conference, and I think they recorded it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, whatever you'd like to share, we can link it into the show notes, or if you can get it archived somewhere on the raSmith website and link it that way. Happy to give props back to the mothership there.
Sure.
For people to go look at that additional information as a resource to them. Let me see, going through the notes, I think you may have talked about these project examples already, but I don't know, did we talk about Collectivo Coffee?
Collectivo Coffee, yeah. So it's a local coffee roaster that's started in the 90s here in the Milwaukee area. They've expanded into Chicago and Madison, Wisconsin now, but great client, long-term client, and they bought a site in a community called Bayview, just south of downtown Milwaukee, very close to where I live and work. And it was a contaminated site. It was a laundromat. And then it was a bank. And so very tight urban soils, a lot of junk, a lot of gack. We were not going to infiltrate anything into the ground there. But what we did do is, again, this was a very collaborative effort. We had a room full of people. We were brainstorming, and we said, we got a lot of roof here. And no one can see the roof, so it doesn't really pay to do a green roof because no one's going to be up there to appreciate it. What if we took the roof water and did something with it on the site? And what we did is on one half of the roof that drains to the east, we took that roof water, that rainwater, and we put it through a series of troughs and created a big water feature. And it's a series of troughs that drop, and then it gets recirculated and filtered back up to the top. So it's always moving. And kids like take their little rubber duckies and they have like races in this water feature. So it becomes a teaching, like they're touching it, they're smelling it, they're seeing it. This is rainwater. And we did some creative signage and stuff so people get their head around it. And when that system surges, or if we get a lot of rainfall, there's an overflow or a weir that goes into an alluvial kind of like dry stream bed. And it moves very slowly through a landscape. And then the last line of defense before it gets into this municipal storm sewer is, again, this dry stream bed and this landscape. So again, it's slowing it down, but we're not really infiltrating anything, but it's moving through, it's passing through this landscape. On the other side of the site, because the roof was split, there's a couple scuppers that came down. We built a cistern because this owner is very dialed into landscape and native landscape and what it takes to manage native landscape. It becomes almost like an identifier for them. All of their sites have these really cool, like hippie looking landscapes and stuff. And the people who take care of those landscapes understand that they can use this water in this cistern to irrigate the landscape. And they know that they can't just let it sit there for months and months. It'll turn into a really bad science project. So they utilize that water. And then what doesn't go into the cistern goes through another dry stream bed and eventually makes its way to a storm sewer. So what we've done in a
Wow.
very tight urban site is we've just held back and slowed down.
Oh,
And
yeah,
that was the
that's
design. Yeah, it was really cool.
that's shocker. That's what Mother Nature does, and what we're trying to do. It's again, it's team common sense over here, man. I love it. It just now we were joking pre-call that I was like, oh man, nature ignores design that ignores nature. Like I am not saying that on air because
Now you're going to say it all the time.
I'm gonna hack it up. But no, yeah, now it totally makes sense. It's that same idea. Why would you try to stick a square hole in a round peg when you don't
Yeah.
have to?
We did a hospital campus up in the central part of the state several years ago, and the soil was all sand. But again, the way we approached that, and this is because the president of the hospital and the facilities management team were all part of our initial meetings on the design. So we got them to completely understand how we can approach this design and then how they can manage it. And the cool thing about that project was when I walked out there the first time, it was all agricultural field. It was big sky, lots of sky, pretty wide open site. There was some trees, but most of it was ag field. And so I did a little research and I found what was growing here 250 years ago, pre-settlement. What types of plants were growing in this area? And it really boiled down to four types. It was oak savanna, hardwoods, cedar glades, black-eyed Susan, and little bluestem. Some grasses, some forbs, some evergreens, and a lot of hardwoods. So I used that as a guide on how we were going to approach this landscape because if it was growing there 250 years ago, it's going to do pretty well now. And we're not going to try to fight growing something in sand that wasn't really adapted to grow there. So that was just a really cool opportunity to use nature and history to develop a site plan that they now maintain very well because they brought the right people to the table to take care of it.
It's interesting, and we talked about the pushback already, but it seems like you've been able to, I don't know, you've been able to find your way into the middle and make these ideas. I guess it matters though. Have you had to? What am I trying to ask you? I guess you mentioned a lot of times about the owner's buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had that situation where you had to maybe work on getting that buy-in a little bit more to be able to make some of these things happen? Or is it pretty much, if the owner's not on board, he's probably not budging, so you just really have to have those forward-thinking or owners to begin with? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a combination, and I will tell you that I'll be the first to raise my hand and talk someone out of it if I know they're not going to manage it properly, or if they don't have the right site for it. They want to do it, they say they want to do it, but then when I say, okay, here's the cost, and then here's the maintenance requirements, and then this is what it's going to take, and they're like, we're not going to do that. I said, so again, why would we plant $20 bills? I'm not going to try to force someone into doing something that they're not going to be able to manage. It does start in the beginning, and I have been very fortunate to have some clients and owners who are open-minded and understanding about what this is all about and why we do it. And there's always the why. Some people do it because they want to be stewards of the land, or some people do it because they want to spin it into their sustainability marketing kind of a thing. And with sustainability, one of the things I talk about in the class that I teach is I personally think sustainability, or the word sustainable, is overused and misused. It's become like a buzz term that people just use just to say that they're doing something sustainable. And I always challenge that. I said, is it really truly sustainable, or is it less non-sustainable? So I use that term instead. We're being less non-sustainable, and it's going to have lessened impacts, and it's going to be more logically efficient. But it doesn't mean that it's going to be sustainable. So when you really look, it's a very tribal term, and I think it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So I'm always the guy, and I'm not a cynic, I'm a realist, but I'm the guy in the room just raising my hand, challenging that. So yeah, that's how it happens, Ty, is that it just really depends on the design team. It depends on the goals of the project. We had a project here in Milwaukee where it was a foundation, and it's a really beautiful historic building on the north end of downtown. And we designed it, again, a very tight urban site, and we designed the driveway that kind of looped around the back of the building. And it wasn't a lot of pavement, but it was a driveway and a parking area. We designed it for permeable pavers and the void space underneath those pavers to detain stormwater. And I don't know how it happened, but someone talked to the owner or the client or the contractor, and they said, no, we're going to use permeable concrete. And again, I raised my hand. I said, that's fine in other areas where we don't get freeze thaw, but every project that I've seen in Wisconsin with permeable concrete or asphalt has failed, and it turns into popcorn. And the reason is that sediment gets built up in those pores, it freezes and thaws, it holds moisture, and it pops like popcorn. And I really tried talking him out of it. I said the permeable pavers are pre-cracked and they perform really well. And we have a lot of case studies and proven examples of where permeable pavers in this climate perform excellent for decades. But no, we're going to use this concrete. And I'm like, okay. 2 years later, they ripped it all out and they put in permeable pavers, and it is performing just like it was from day one. So again, it's just one of those things where you try to share your experience with someone, and most people listen. Most people go, yeah, no, that makes sense, because concrete's going to crack and asphalt's going to crack. What do you do with permeable concrete and asphalt when it cracks? You don't seal it. And I think permeable pavers, from an investment standpoint, if you're an agency or a landowner or you're going to hold on to that property for a long time, the cost benefit of using the permeable pavers over standard asphalt is phenomenal, because asphalt gets really expensive to maintain after 12 to 15 years. You got to seal it, you got to seal coat it, you got to stripe it, you got to do this, you got to do a mill and overlay, you got to do this, you got to do that. It's a lot of maintenance. It goes in cheap, but then it gets really expensive. Where pavers go in pre-cracked, they perform really well. The density on those pavers is, the PSI strength is phenomenal. You can take a bowling ball and throw it down on there and you're not going to crack one. But the maintenance, yeah, there's some maintenance with permeable pavers. You got to do some sweeping and you got to replenish the infill gravel once in a while. But other than that, you can snowplow it. It's always a big thing. Oh, we can't snowplow it. Yes, you can. The streets of Montreal are almost all pavers. They get snow up there. They plow it. So it's all these things that people think about, oh, I don't want to do that because, but then once they see it and once they experience it, then it happens project by project, region by region, but eventually people come around and see, hey, that's a successful installation and that's going to work for me. And if you're going to hold on to that property for a long time, it's a great investment, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So you teach a class and you give these presentations. Obviously, it's always a little different on a podcast because we're talking back and forth, and I'm interrupting you, and I'm squirreling off in different directions. As we're wrapping up, like, what have we missed, right? Like, what are some of the things that, if you were to, did we miss anything? Like, let's go back to, again, nature ignores design, that ignores nature. That talk, that class, that presentation. What did we miss, or what else would you like to share that you think back through our conversation over the last 30 minutes?
One of the slides that I present is a photograph of the Mecan River in central Wisconsin, and it shows a river, a low flow channel, a floodplain, and side slopes. And so I put that picture up there and I ask everyone to just observe this. What's happening in this photograph? And then I go to a bioswale in the middle of a parking lot where there's not enough real estate for it to be effective, and they planted all the trees in the bottom, and the side slopes are just seeded with grass. And I said, what's wrong with this picture? It's not following nature. If you go back to that picture I just showed you, all the trees are on the side slopes and the uplands. That's where the trees grow. They don't grow down in a low flow channel. They don't grow down in the floodplain. That's grasses, that's the aquatic habitat. When you look at a natural stream in a floodplain and side slopes, you get that mindset, and then that's what we do to approach our design. So the side slopes are planted with woody vegetation. The bottom of the basin is the floodplain, and then there's typically a low flow channel that goes through it. What you need to do that effectively is you need space, you need real estate, and you're not going to be able to do that in a parking lot island. It's just not enough real estate to be effective. You can do it out on the perimeter of the site, where you have more green space and more real estate to work with. But when they try to jam it into these clay bathtubs and these parking lot islands, it's time and time again. I have so many photographs that I show where they failed. Intentioned, but just not effective. And long term, it's just not going to work. So I guess that was one thing, is I just wanted to compare that natural environment to how we approach a design of these systems and getting that into your head. And then also, I think I mentioned I was interviewed on a podcast last year about water, and it was more about water quality and water ethic and our relationship to water. And when you start to think about why are we doing GI, why stormwater is one thing, but groundwater is another thing, and what is our relationship to water? And I came out with this saying that's the earth is not green, it's blue. And I think we need to start thinking differently about our relationship to water and how we use water. We've done projects where we take roof water, we use it for flushing toilets. We did the first project in Wisconsin where that was done. And then I go to the Seattle airport, and all of their bathrooms are using roof water to flush toilets. So it's becoming more of a mindset. And I think we just have to have a better relationship with our water and an understanding of what it takes to maintain clean, potable drinking water. When you think about it, it takes 105,000 gallons of water to make one car. You start to get your head around it. Or we use more water in one day than we use oil in a year. It's just something to get your head around. So, yeah, that's just the...
Our 35 years of experience, are we making any progress? I get a little jaded sometimes. I can feel like people are like, yeah, we're making progress, and I just feel like sometimes we're just not. But I've only been around stormwater for about 13 years, and it's just like, man, it just still seems like the general public still doesn't have a clue. But like in what you're talking about, as far as I got my lead AP in a different life back in 2008, and I remember all those things. And you're talking about using roof water to flush toilets and all that. 2024, I feel like I travel around a decent amount. I just don't see it. I don't see it as much as I think I don't know why we don't see it. It seems, again, let's go back to team common sense. I don't know, how cost prohibitive is it to redirect that water? I don't know. But do you see the progress? Do you feel good about the future? Or I don't know. I don't want to be like doom and gloom, but what are your thoughts on that?
I've read a lot of books. The last one I read was Superman Isn't Coming. And it really is that if we think that the DNR and the EPA is doing everything in its power to be able to protect our drinking water, we're wrong. There are a lot of threats to our water. Currently here in Wisconsin, we have PFAS, and they're finding that in a lot of municipal water systems. They're finding it in white-tailed deer. They're finding it in bald eagles. This is a forever chemical. So are we making progress? I start out that presentation by saying the Clean Water Act of 1972. How is that working out for us?
Yeah, exactly. That's what
and the Clean Water Act only addresses surface water. It doesn't address groundwater, but they're interconnected, as we all know. So again, I don't want to be jaded or cynical, but I'm just more of a realist, and that's why I think we have to really understand what is actually happening and not just deny it or just assume that these agencies are doing everything they can to protect our water. We just had a manure spill here from a CAFO in Wisconsin, and it killed fish a mile long in a stream a mile long because it was just leaking liquid, raw, untreated manure from a huge dairy CAFO into a stream in Monroe County, and it got reported by an angler. So the farm wasn't even reporting the spill. And so who pays for that cleanup? Those are the kinds of things that I just try to create awareness about when I speak. I just try to get people's head in the game about water quality and our relationship to it. And when I cite examples like that, a lot of people say, I don't believe it. I never knew. I'm like, yeah, it's a big thing here. We're America's dairy wasteland up here in Wisconsin. So
yeah,
it's
and
just
that's a whole
something.
other conversation about ag and exemptions, and I just think I don't
It
know.
is a whole nother conversation.
I don't want to take the conversation a weird spot right here at the end.
We're talking about stormwater, right?
Yeah, stormwater, and we're talking about cool stuff, about cool designs. So what would you be like? Let's turn this frown upside down. What would you say would be some good tips that you could provide? Let's say I'm an engineer and I'm trying to do a design, but I don't have access to somebody like yourself, right? So I'm fighting the fight against it's stormwater, so we're let's just stick a detention bond in and move on. Stamp like a conveyor belt. Sorry, I'm not really taking shots at that world. It just sometimes you got a lot of work. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of projects. It worked before. It can work again. I get all of that, but we've got you here. you are this liaison between the dreams of architecture of making that building float and defy gravity, and the reality of the fact that it has to not fall over, or the design work and the landscape around it. But if I don't have somebody like yourself, what do I do? What are my resources? What are your thoughts on that, or tips, or ideas?
I think there are a lot of resources out there
Yeah.
and a lot of examples. That's why we were invited to come down to New Orleans and talk at that symposium, because they came up here and they saw these examples of projects that we were doing up here, and they said, we got to have you down here because we just passed a new stormwater ordinance and we want to know more about how this works and why you do it. So I think there are resources. There are some books out there. One is, I think it's like Artful Stormwater Design or something like that. It's one of the book references that I use in the class that I teach. And so there are some books out there. I just think thinking differently, and depending on the client, like when we were working with Cabela's, sure, we could have just done a big rectangle pond and lined it with a rock and attracted a bunch of Canadian geese, but that's not what they wanted. They wanted something that actually looked like it occurred in nature. So we have a different shape to the pond. We have a lot of different side slopes. It varies. The terrain varies. The vegetation varies. And because we have taller vegetation around this pond, we don't attract Canadian geese to that site. Yeah, I think if you're an engineer, you're working on a site plan, reach out, ask questions. There are, even if a landscape architect or someone like myself isn't on the team, there's things like this, just conversations like we're having,
Sure.
that listen to a podcast about it, or you can go online now and find anything, so it's got to be true, right?
Just Google it. Just Google it.
Yeah, of course.
I think this is going to be the first episode that's going to require a glossary, so we'll go ahead and recap. So rainfall integration equals different mindset toward how you look at stormwater management. Less non-sustainable means don't check the box. Are you truly trying to be sustainable, or are you checking a box? And then, or correct me if I'm wrong. And then the most important one probably is the nature ignores design that ignores nature, meaning when you're sitting on your project and you're looking at it and it's just, I don't know, if it doesn't meet the common sense rule, then maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's a better way. And again, of course, you have to go and take into account the money, the maintenance,
the budget,
the commitment to the maintenance, and all those things. But I like the idea of integrating ourselves into the environment instead of managing our way through the environment. I really do appreciate what some people would call semantics, but I think it's just you truly are providing a different mindset by changing that terminology.
I'm trying.
At least for me. So
Good.
I get it now, and I can say it. I've said it multiple times now, so I feel good about it. When I first looked at it, I was like, "Oh, great! Thanks, Tom, for the tongue twister right out of the gate." But no, it makes a lot of sense. What's the best way to get in touch with you? We're going to link all your socials in the show notes and whatnot. Do you want your email box blown up? Do you want people to reach out to you on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. My email is tom.mortensen@rasmith.com, and it's SEN, not SON. Because there's two ways to spell Mortensen. One is Norwegian and one is Danish, and I'm Danish, so it's SEN. But no, feel free to share anything, and if you do have questions, again, I'll get that slide deck to you.
That'd be awesome. And then what I may do is which those that make it this far in the pod, they'll be mad when I say this. We may try to integrate some of that imagery into the YouTube version. So I may cut a separate intro for this recording and put it and let people know that this may be a YouTube episode, because I think there's just a lot of imagery for me anyways. Like, it's not like it was a struggle. It was a pleasure talking to you through it, and I've got a pretty good imagination, but I think those pictures, they probably really tell the story quite well.
Yeah, for sure. I'll be happy to share that.
All right. Any other final party thoughts as we end on a high note? And we are here. We're all going to make an impact, and we are cognizant. If you're listening to this podcast, you are part of the solution. So we appreciate you listening. But any other final thoughts that you have for the listeners?
Yeah, I do think things in certain areas are getting better. And I really do think that we're implementing strategies. And like I mentioned before, the grant funding, the incentivizing of green infrastructure, it's only going to help. Every gallon that we can prevent from going into a combined sewer and ending up into Lake Michigan is 1 gallon that we don't have to treat. And I'm excited about that. But yeah, other than that, it's just been really a pleasure finally connecting with you and through our mutual friend and colleague, Jeff Mazonik. I appreciate that. And
yeah, shout out to Jeff.
Yeah, he's a great guy. and knows everyone. I'm glad that.
If it were him on this podcast, he'd think of something snarky to say about me. But I'm just gonna shout out to Jeff. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
Dude. If you like engineers, he's all right.
Oh yeah. Yep. Very good guy. So thanks again, Ty. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tom. I appreciate you being on the pod.